at the end of the day, I think all of these things, data literacy, data quality, it doesn't matter how good your tooling is. You could really have the world's best analytic self-service tooling, but if you don't have the culture around using it, it isn't going to work. It's actually a challenge in our data culture. We need to fix this problem of incentives. Like, we need to build this world where our product teams care about data enough that there's a pull for this stuff rather than a push.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Nick.
Hello. I'm so jealous of that view.
So for everyone who's just tuning in, this is the active volcano that's going on in Iceland right now. This is my home.
Wow, this is my bedroom.
But I'm also jealous of that because while it may look pretty, it's pretty cold. And you can't comfortably go surfing, as I know you were just doing, Nick.
I can't say I was comfortably surfing either, but probably more comfortably than Iceland.
That's a fair point. All right, I'm gonna do a quick intro. I am really excited to have you here, Nick, to follow up with the podcast episode, which just came out today. Woo!
Exciting. I haven't even listened to it yet, the full one.
Yeah, you woke up and directly to the interview.
Yeah, that's the next task.
I listened to it a couple of times already, and it's good. You have some juicy stories to tell there, and I loved it. So for everyone who is just tuning in here and wants to check out the podcast episode, you can find it at therighttrack.avo.app/podcast. And for a quick intro, Nick is a senior product analyst at Culture Amp, and he has a background in design and marketing. And is well versed. This is an Icelandic thing. You always switch the W's and the V. It's really interesting. He is well versed in how different roles use data in their work. So I want to dive into some subjects with him, but you can also ask questions, whoever is tuning in here. You can hop into the chat on Twitch or on our Slack channel and share your questions for Nick, or DM me on Twitter, or Lex, who's also supporting us in this here, or the Avo HQ Twitter account. If you're not already a part of our Slack community, you can actually join us at, therighttrack.avo.app/Slack. Yeah, and you can find it there. Exactly. So, Nick, welcome. Cheers.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Cheers. I've only got an empty coffee, so yeah.
Oh,
it's a bit sad.
I am hoping that you have already filled it up and drunk it, though. It's not.
It is. It's a ghost of a coffee, not an empty cup.
That's good. Yeah, my worry would be if this was like pre your first cup of coffee. That would be my worry.
Me too.
But it's not. Yeah, so you're dialing in from Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dialing in from Iceland.
Yes.
We have some folks backstage dialing in from LA. And so we are covering a bunch of different time zones, which is pretty exciting.
It's a feat.
I don't know if you can see it, but so it's actually erupting right now. Can you see the light? No, you can't. No, it's
just gonna be an episode of me staring at my
But all right, let's get into it. I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the themes from the episodes. I want to talk a little bit about recovering from data crisis, part 2.
Yeah, fun.
One of the things we discussed in this episode was how your team recovers from identifying error in the data. When we talked, you had just gotten a call about a huge issue on your undercounting your users. This can be such a learning and bonding moment for teams. I had a conversation with Mark Church from Patreon on it as well. Can you update us on the situation?
I can. Actually, last week it was finally fixed. It's been quite a journey. The problem is resolved. But yeah, like you said, It was absolutely a journey. I think it's like, I describe it as a fire drill, but then I realized it's not really a drill. It was just a fire. But it's like a fire drill in the sense that it was a really good way for us um, to just go through the motions of where the responsibility sits, what the real impact of these things are. And I think it does actually just illustrate, when something goes wrong, what the impact is. Like sometimes you don't know the impact of what you're doing is until it's not there anymore. And I think that was pretty true in this case. It brought a lot of people
You don't
in.
know what you
Basically
have
touched the whole
until you've
company.
lost it, type of
Until
thing.
it's gone. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I recently had this a very similar conversation. I mean, we have this thing called what's it called? Chaos engineering, or where you generate, issues in your production
Yep.
environments
Netflix Chaos
to
Monkey.
get
Yep.
exactly, yeah, chaos monkeying. Yeah. The term was completely stolen from me. Thank you. So I was thinking, why aren't we doing that in this? But at the same time, again, my perspective is like, when these things happen, I totally agree with you. It's sort of like a fire drill, except it's not a drill. And then you want it to happen to something that's not nearly serious.
Yeah.
But how is the problem solving going? It sounds like it took a while, and now we're back up and running.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing we learned from this is it's a really hard to detect issue. Like, detection of data quality is pretty hard. We had for those who haven't heard yet, the long story short is, one of our most critical events wasn't failing entirely. It was only working about 9% of the time. So it's hard to detect a problem like that because it's consistently wrong. So it wasn't like it dropped off all of a sudden, or it wasn't like it never got tracked in the first place. So it was kind of sitting there in the background, and then we compared to other data that we really realized that was wrong. And so the fix, it was actually quite a tough one as well, because and this kind of does shine a light. When you are decentralized, these problems are kind of tough. Like who owns fixing that? And if someone doesn't fix that, well, that's probably a problem. If your approach is decentralized, how do you make sure that the right people, that you have this custodianship of this area, and that's really what we realized is probably a problem. Like we had this coarse idea of custodianship. This was one part of the product, and this group of teams owned it, but which team, that was really unclear. And so this whole thing ended up touching our chief product officer and a CTO, our head of engineering. It became a lot of work to fix what was actually in reality probably 40 lines in a PR. Like the actual, and I think a lot of the issues, like the actual technical challenge, is often pretty minuscule. And not to say that it wasn't hard to resolve, hard to troubleshoot and understand. There's a lot of challenges there, but it's more the organizational challenge of like discovering where this information is and how to actually troubleshoot in the first place was actually what was hard, and that's why it took so long to fix. Yeah,
I think this also touches a little bit on something that's a personal passion of mine, which is, and we've talked a little bit about this also, which is data literacy. And for everyone on the team to have the ability to identify when data looks right and when data looks wrong, that definitely increases the probability of finding issues like these. I would imagine. And you talked a little bit on the podcast about sort of data trust sometimes being actually, not only about I don't trust this data, but I don't trust myself to pull this data.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes back to kind of a whole chain of challenges of data quality, but not only data quality, but do you actually understand where the data comes from? Is it documented well? Can you rely on it? And then that's dependent on the systems that you have. And when I say systems, I mean actually the processes and people in place, more so than the actual necessarily the tooling that to think about this thing, to have ownership, to make sure that it is high quality and reliable. So it's this huge foundation that sits behind the scenes of getting that nice little accurate chart at the end.
Totally. I know that you have been building up your team, so I'm going to sort of use this as a segue into talking both a little bit about that, but also about ownership for quality. Um, has your you've been hiring new people, or like the team has been growing? The product analyst team has been growing. You had this incident. What is your vision for how quality gets maintained? And are you thinking about centralized ownership? Are you thinking about making it into everyone's approach, all of the team's approach? How should it work?
So we've actually, as a company, we've flipped on this a few times. And I think many companies, maybe people sector, have gone through the same journey where, to begin with, we're really centralized, and then we working with the CTO and the way the company is structured. Like, the company had this huge push to be decentralized generally, microservices, things like that. And so we similarly wanted to decentralize kind of as much as possible about the way that we do analytics, so teams aren't blocked and they have that kind of capability to do analytics themselves. I think what we did, the mistake we made, is we tried to decentralize too quickly, and we didn't have good systems in place. We didn't know ourselves what good looked like, so how could we get teams to own this if we didn't ourselves? And so I think what a lot of companies, a lot of people I'm speaking to, in fact, pretty much everyone I speak to at the moment, they've settled on this hybrid approach of centralizing a bit of the input. So going to governance a little bit, but centralizing governance, and then trying to decentralize some of the analytics. So the consumption, the analysts are close to the problem, but the collection, the quality of the data, and the tools are more centralized. And I think that trend, we'll guess that'll play out, and we'll see how that works. But what I think is interesting, I think what we want to do longer term, is go back to decentralizing these things, but we need to do it in a sensible way. And I think that there's kind of 3 steps to getting there on this governance problem. So we realized for right now, to get our data quality high, we need centralized governance, because if you have all these different teams sending data over the fence, treating it like logging with no collaboration on what the right event is, you get mess. You get unusable data that is garbage, and that's where we got to. And I know this is a problem for quite a few. I was actually just speaking to some people at ZipPay, which is like a buy now pay later startup, in quite a big one in Australia, and they just have had, just like us, the exact same problem, and now they're looking at governance. So I think the first step is to centralize the governance, get it right, define the standards of good governance, and get a really good baseline. And then you can start decentralizing it. So what we want to do is, right now, the teams are responsible for implementation, so that's decentralized, but the governance and the creation and maintaining the schema is centralized with us. We don't really have the systems of tooling allow us to decentralize any further, but what we eventually want to do is, rather than a PM coming to us and saying, hey, what do we need to track? And then us giving them a tracking plan and a set of schemas that are then enforced. What we want to do is get to this point where, and this next step is have our PMs submit something like a PR to us and can say, hey, we this is what we think the tracking should be. And so now the governance is not the process of creating the schemas, it's just, you just have centralized governance for just checking that it's right, making sure that this makes sense. And then it, like, kind of dream down the road is that we start to decentralize even that step of the governance. So we might have a few people, probably only 1 or 2 in each kind of what we call camp, like a tribe, Spotify, whatever you want to call the department, that can take on this role. And that's a small group of people. So that's like, as we grow, I think that's a way that we can kind of start to centralize things more and more in a sustainable way while keeping our quality up. But I do think the first step is the right step is to start central, just to get the baseline right.
I really love this perspective, and I just couldn't agree more with the journey. And it reminds me of the QuizUp journey that we went through. It also reminds me of the Patreon journey that they went through. It also also reminds me of the Fender journey. Fender, the guitar makers, they have an app for learning how to play the guitar. And they have a really fantastic product team, and they are sort of going through the same thing. I think ultimately you have these experts on the team that know a lot about data structures, and how good data gets created, but you want them to eventually end up in an advisory role, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah.
So exciting. I am excited for you on that journey, and look forward to part 3, where we'll get an update on the progress for that.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So you mentioned this is a journey through quiz up. Where did you get to, and what was that journey?
Yeah, we should have a follow-up conversation about it. But the short story is we went from centralized. I was the founding analyst, and I hired a bunch of people, so we were centralized. To needing to really support the product team, so we turned everyone into agents. And while we had like centralized, weekly meetings or so to talk to each other about like what some of the challenges, and I was sort of like a discipline lead, everyone reported to their team leads. And at some point, exactly like you're experiencing right now, we found that, okay, actually, while we are building the muscles, and the muscle memory for doing everything correctly, we need to work closer together. And so we sat together and worked together as a team for 6 months, the data team, before sort of and had like agents in all of the teams, but sort of and that was sort of the birth for, I would say, like the mixed approach, where you have some centralized supporting function, but you have agents in all of the different teams. But the first step, I agree with you, is building that muscle.
Yeah.
And that just happens too slowly if you don't have anything centralized.
Yeah, you need people to push it forward in the first place and define what's good. And so there is a place for centralization, and I don't think it's a dirty word. I think it's still handy and useful. So yeah.
Yeah, democratization requires governance, right?
Yeah,
something like that. Okay, so thank you so much for covering that a little bit. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sort of you have now been on this journey, like the company Culture Amp as an organization has been building more of like a mixed top-down and bottom-up data-led approach. And we spoke on the podcast about how you motivate people to dig into data. And one method we spoke about is tying teams' goals more closely to metrics. I'm curious, it's not been that long since we talked, but I'm curious whether you have, anything more to share. Can you elaborate how metrics can be motivating, but also any pitfalls to avoid there that you've learned since we last talked?
It's a really great question. I'll start with something that I've learned quite recently in terms of ways to motivate people around metrics. And I think what I saw really recently is one of our product managers went out and seriously impressed us with the analytics that they did around their product area. Like they presented this thing. They had a growth model. They had analytics, like very good metrics around all the steps in that model. They looked at their retention curve, and they were thinking about where they can optimize using data. And it was like incredible to see.
Heartwarming, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was very, very good. And I think, like, I was speaking to that PM, and I was trying to understand, what motivated them to do that. And I'd love to take credit, but actually, I think there's definitely, in some cases, there's this like appeal to authority. And they themselves hadn't done it, but they'd seen some of the content from Reforge, which Andrew Chen and Brian Balfour run, and it's actually very, very great content. If anyone is thinking about doing it, it's quite interesting and enjoyable. And I think having people that leaders like this, especially in the product management space, that are this authority that are saying this is worthwhile and these are interesting and not just interesting but essential things to look at. Like retention is the one of the most important things to look at. That motivated them to look into this, and I think that also made me realize that they're able to measure everything that they needed to. So we have the tools and systems in places well enough. They can always improve, but they seem to be good enough that they're able to do it. So that's really exciting, and that was really great to see. And And so that makes me think, how can we take that further? Like that's one point. How can we start to move that to the circle around that project manager and kind of get that inspiration to other teams as well?
Like a positive reinforcement loop.
Yeah, exactly. And so onto the pitfalls. I think that the one that we've fallen into and is pretty common, seems to be pretty common, is just having too much. And the biggest problem when you have too much is metrics only motivating if people understand what it means. They buy into the strategy around it. Like a metric's really just the outcome of the strategy, right? So they buy into the strategy and they believe in that thing, and that there is some priority to that. So if you've got 20 metrics to chase, it's demotivating. You're stuck in analysis paralysis. Like, which one do I focus on? Where do I go? How do I? It becomes really difficult to deliver these things. And or if you do have 20, maybe you can kind of go, well, I'm going to do anything, and if any of them move, then I've succeeded, right? And so you don't have the sense of direction and alignment. And people also don't feel motivated as much, I find, when they have lots of metrics to chase, because it doesn't feel like they're delivering on anything. It doesn't feel like they're not seeing their impact that they're making. So if you can narrow down the metrics and into a narrow path, like this is the thing you're trying to chase, and people bought into it, that's when it's motivating. If you have too many, it's kind of the opposite effect.
That is really interesting. This is this is reminding me of both just the general North Star framework, which it's supposed to have a North Star, but it also has a bunch of different inputs. And hopefully they're designed so that you have, a bunch of inputs that are actually impacting the North Star, and they don't conflict with each other. But you can definitely, it's very easy to create conflicting metrics.
Yeah.
And it's also reminding me of a tweet I think I saw from John Cutler this week, who was it was a guest on the Right Track podcast a couple of episodes ago. He is head of education at Amplitude, and I think he was saying something like, overheard in a a realistic job interview or something, like, what do you do if you have to choose between driving your OKR or doing what's best for your company? And it's like, what? What? Wait, what?
That's that is very true. I'm sure a lot of people feel that. I like that.
It's just it's very touche. I think the best answer that I saw on this discussion was, well, you need to do your job and like question the OKR and the OKR process. if driving your OKR is not what's best for the company, you have an opportunity to change something, and that should be your focus. But it's very difficult running a huge organization and relying on everyone having that sort of insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is another thing. I do see a lot of people questioning their OKRs, because I think the nature of the process is a very waterfall process, setting it at a company level and then tiering them down to the different teams. It's great for alignment, but if things are moving really, really quickly, sometimes like that tweet illustrates, they can become very misaligned to what people are trying to actually do day to day. And yeah, I'm not sure how to fix it, but it's certainly a challenge that I think a lot of people are facing at the moment.
Yeah. I am going to maybe switch over to another subject that I'm curious about, because I know, again, you're hiring. You're not only hiring for analytics. I'm curious to hear you talk about, how do you onboard people into data trust and data, culture, data curiosity, because there are new people joining the team, and again, you can continually reinforce data literacy on the company, but do you have anything already in place for onboarding new team members into data at Culture Amp, and particularly maybe also, but not limited to, roles that are maybe less used to working with data?
It's a really good question, and to be perfectly honest with you, I think this is, as a team, one of our weakest areas right now. So we particularly, through last year, there's a pause in hiring, so there weren't new people joining, and we didn't invest in it. And now, Culture Amp has 100 people joining us in the next couple of weeks. And so for a very small team, it's a hard thing to support, but it's extremely important. I think that this is on our roadmap. It's one of those cards that have been sitting there. Like we need to do a better job of this. Right now, largely what it is, and I don't think this is necessarily the right approach, is very functional. Like here's the tools that are available and here's how to access them, use them. But what the ideal state looks like is actually starting with the thinking and the outcomes that we want people to adopt. So understanding how we think about engagement and retention and what those metrics look like, and then practically showing how those can be measured and used and actually delivered with our tooling. So that's where we'd like to get to, but unfortunately not where we're at right now. I think we've lost. We're back.
By nature, as a founder, I'm very optimistic, and I saw this evening, and I decided to risk a couple of minutes or seconds of slow Wi-Fi to do that. So I do apologize.
I hope I wasn't cut off there as well, but
yeah, no, but sorry. I hope you what?
Did you get me then? Was that
yes? Yeah. No, that was good.
Cool.
The thing that I did want to mention is, like, I had a conversation about this with Maura, and I think that's very inspiring. It's something that I don't think we did. We were at a very similar place that as you were describing at QuizUp, where it didn't have its own initiative to do this, but I think there are really great opportunities to do this. And one of the things that one of the things they do at Patreon is they have a monthly onboarding session for new team members. So every month, Maura personally does a session where she walks through a bunch of different things about data culture at Patreon, describes, how they define different types of metrics, because in so many cases, it really boils down to, you may understand the concept of retention, but there are all of these details about literally what is the born cohort and what is the return cohort, and what does that, like, what does 36% mean for Culture Amp today? It's
or how do you think about that in, a bunch of our products have like quarterly or yearly usage cadence. So how do you think about retention for those products? Or do you think about retention and do you think about other metrics instead and how they drive, users to other loops? So there's certainly some challenges there.
Yeah.
I think, and to that point as well, it's to that point as well, if you think about it, onboarding someone is probably the best time to easily make an impact in your data culture, right? Like you've got this fresh person who's eager to learn, eager to impress, and want to like make their mark. And so you have this fresh opportunity to set the standard of what you want to do. You don't have this maybe the team has some legacy that they have to worry about, and it's harder to shift their the analytics literacy really quickly. But you've got these fresh people, and they can be the kind of standard that you want to create in that company as they come in.
Yeah, you can like be really early in giving them that positive reinforcement, so they're like hungry for more.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you one more, just sort of more of like an open-ended, to wrap up our call, because we are about to be finished with time. Before I ask you what's next for you personally, we know that in the world of product and data, there's always a challenge on the horizon. And I mean, we've already covered a bunch of really exciting projects that you personally have and the team and the company with this. But what do you consider? What do you consider to be the next big challenge that you're planning to tackle at Culture Amp?
There's many. I think that the biggest piece in all of this is there's a lot of thinking in our product group in shifting the way that Culture Amp operates as a company from it's this multi-product B2B company. It's complex, and most of our thinking is still very much funnel driven. So a sales funnel driving people in. You activate, you get a bunch of users, and then they use it. We now have a lot of products that have really good usage retention through managers who are our focus. So there's this, and it's going to be a very big shift. There's a big shift in how we're trying to think about and go out to market a little bit in terms of the way the products are thought about and the suite of products, how they exist. And essentially how do people come in, and then how does that form habits? So this is quite a shift in thinking from quite a flat view of many products that just do their own thing. And the hard thing around that, but the really interesting challenge is how do you build an analytics framework that matches that and support that. So as that shifts, as we go, if we want to focus on product-led growth, great for analytics, great for pull analytics, but also quite a different approach to how some teams used to working. So there's going to be a big shift and uplift in how we think about things, what's important, what metrics actually matter. So I think that's the next big bit at Culture Amp, and I think it's going to be an exciting change, but also a big one.
Yeah, that's really exciting. From my perspective as an outsider, the most important thing that I've seen that is one of the leading indicators that this will be successful is that you have leadership support. There is excitement around doing this. So that would be a completely different journey for you if you were tackling that without.
If it was led by us, I would. I think I'd be a bit too optimistic to push that. But yeah, that's absolutely right.
But to wrap this up, what is next for you, Nick? What is next for Nick Threapleton? Any announcement that you are excited to share with the audience?
What is next? So as our team's growing, I'm stepping into a product management role, so product manager of analytics, and that's largely what I do today, despite my job title. Anyway, because that's what we need to do. That's really interesting, and I really enjoy it. It's also worth calling out we're basically always hiring at the moment. So we have more roles coming up where I'm really passionate about also bringing not just it's very, very normal and tempting to just hire seniors, but I'm really passionate about bringing junior people and people that are just kind of getting started in and finding their feet into the world. So for example, we're hiring junior product analysts for the first time, which is really great and gives some opportunities. I'm also looking at how we can mentor and bring people in through internships and graduate programs as well to skill people up and just build more people in this area, build more skill, because it's particularly in Australia, there's just not a lot of people that are in product analytics, but there's a lot of companies that need it.
That is awesome. I'm going to say Australia is very lucky to have you with that person, with that passion. And I totally agree with you. The space is just exploding with this. And it sounds like you're on a journey to become the product analytics educator of Australia, which is pretty fun.
maybe one day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nick. I very much appreciate you taking the time early in the morning. And we're really glad to have you as a part of our community and have you join the Right Track podcast.
Great to be a part of it. Yeah, thank you.
I hope everyone in the audience learned as much from Nick, from this chat, and also from the podcast as I did. It's always great to chat. So I'm going to just high five you and say we're out.
Hey.